Well, good evening and welcome to Amplified. I'm glad you're here. I hope those of you that went to winter camp enjoyed it. If you didn't, don't tell me because I don't want my feelings to be hurt. No, I'm kidding. Please let me know. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, so that way we can make improvements for next year. We always want to make it a fun and exciting place for you guys to get to know Christ and have a good time. Well, tonight we want to get to the message, and we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapters 18 through 31. That's 13 chapters that we're going to cover tonight, and that's a lot to cover. But I think that it's important because as we look at these 13 chapters, we are going to see something emerge. We are going to see a friendship between King David, or he's not king yet, but between David and Saul's son, Jonathan. And I think it's important for us to understand what true friendship is all about. Because the reality of it now is friendships today are very strange. All right? I remember when I was growing up, when I was your guys' age, I could count all of my friends on one hand. All right? I had 4 of them. 2 of them I went to church with, and I did everything with them at church. 3 of them, one of them went to church, lived around the corner from me, and every day after school I would get home, do my homework. Let's be real, I didn't do my homework first. Go outside, get on my bike, go and knock on my friend's door and go, hey, let's go play. And we would go, we'd build forts, we'd dig trenches, we got in trouble together, we had fun together, but we built these bonds and had a lot of fun growing up, and we were true friends. And of those 4, I am still close friends with 3 of them today. And we hang out on a more regular basis. And I enjoyed those times. But as I get to be, in this day and age, and I look forward at it, I went on today and I looked. I have 723 friends on Facebook. I have 200 friends on Instagram. And I have 100 friends on Twitter. Of those 1,000 friends, those 4 guys are not on that list, either of those lists, but they're still my close friends. And of that 1,000 people, I can probably tell you personal details about maybe 10 of them, and that's my family. All right? Because you see, today we are overly connected, but we are underfulfilled. We have these relationships with people we don't even know. And sure, they wish us happy birthday, and they like our pictures, and we do likewise. We tell them happy birthday, and we like their pictures and things that are going on. But the problem is, we don't have great relationships with them. They don't know who we are. They don't know when we're struggling. They don't know when to come alongside and give us a hug. Sure, we can give them indications, but they don't know who we are. They don't know what's happening. And so we have all of these friends and, hey, check this out. I put up a video and I got 1,000 likes. So what? What does it mean to you? And so today I want us to talk about friendships and the importance of friendships and having true friends and what that looks like. Because it's not just about us having good friends. It's about us being good friends as well. So let's look at our story. It all starts in chapter 18. This is just after David has defeated Goliath. He chases down the Philistines. They kill the Philistines. He takes Goliath's armor off and he puts it in his tent. Then he goes and he takes the head of Goliath and he takes it into King Saul's tent before the king. All right? Then they have this great meeting, and they're talking and discussing the bravery and all of these wonderful things that David has done. And while they're doing this, Jonathan, Saul's son, is enamored with David. And it tells us in the passage that their hearts were knitted together, and they became the best of friends. But his father, Saul, didn't think the same way. His father began to grow weary and suspicious of David. He thought, man, this guy is posing a threat to my throne. And so he did what the proverbial phrase says, and he kept his friends close, but he kept his enemies closer. And so he brought David in and he made him a commander of his army and he sent him out fight after fight. And David was victorious time and time again. And as his popularity grew, Saul became more and more suspicious and more afraid of King David. So he came up with a plan. He said, you know what? I'll offer him my daughter. But in order to get my daughter, he has to kill 100 Philistines. There's no way he can accomplish that task. Surely they'll kill him and then my problems will be over. Well, David accepted the challenge and he went out and he didn't kill 100, he killed 200 Philistines and brought back their trophies and handed them to King Saul. Saul was furious. And he was so worried that David would take over and try to kill him and overthrow his power. So he went to his closest commanders of his army and he brought in his council and he told them, he goes, look, we've got to kill David. He poses too big of a threat. Well, one of those counselors was Jonathan. And Jonathan, immediately after the meeting had dismissed, took off and he went to find David and he told David, he said, look, you need to go and hide. My father is going to try to kill you, but I will talk to him. I will go and stand in your place and convince him to do otherwise. And so Jonathan did just that. Jonathan went to King Saul and he went face to face with him. And he said, Father, how could you kill this innocent man? You know that will anger God and God's wrath will be upon us. He said, why would you kill someone who has done so many mighty things for your kingdom? Not for himself, but for his kingdom. And after talking for a while, he finally convinced King Saul, and King Saul promised, I will not kill David. But King Saul was a liar. And they come in, and one evening, an evil spirit has come across King Saul, and he needs David to come and play the harp like he's done many times before. But as he's sitting there playing the harp, Saul is just staring at him, looking at him. His anger and his jealousy is boiling up inside. And finally, it gets to a boiling point. And he reaches over and he grabs a spear and he hucks it at David. David matrixes the way out of the way. It sticks in the wall and he escapes out the back door and runs back to his home to kiss his wife goodbye and run off to hide. Well, Jonathan hears of this and he goes and finds David. And he says, David, man, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I kind of had an idea, but I didn't think that he'd actually go through with it. And he says, let's give it one more chance. Come on, I can't lose my best friend. You can't go and run. Let's give it one more chance. David says, are you kidding me? Your dad's trying to kill me. I'm not going back there. He goes, come on, please, David, please. And he goes, all right, here's what we'll do. We'll give it one final test. There's a feast coming up, the Feast of the Moon. And we're going to take, during that feast, I'm not going to show up. Because if I show up, I'm dead meat. So I'm not going to be there. When your father asks where I am, I want you to tell him that I asked you if I could go to Bethlehem and have the feast with my family at their request. And Jonathan says, yes, I'll do it. And then I will come back and I will let you know what the answer is. And so he goes, and on the first day of the feast, Saul doesn't ask a question. But on the second day, his curiosity gets to him. And he looks at Jonathan and he says, Jonathan, where's David? And Jonathan says, well, he came to me and he asked me. He said that his brother demanded that he come home for the feast and eat with his family. And so I allowed him to go. I allowed him to go out. And Saul looks at him and he says, you son of a perverse woman, how dare you? How dare you? What were you thinking? And he looks at him and he gets so angry. If he lives, you can't be king. Don't you get this? And Jonathan's, yes, but he's my friend. Why does it matter? And Saul gets so mad, he takes the spear and he hucks it at his own sons. And he matrixes out of the way and escapes out and leaves the feast and isn't there anymore. And he goes and he finds David and he tells him, David, my father's going to kill you. You must go and hide. And they say their goodbyes and they part their ways. David spent the next 10 years running from King Saul. 10 years running in the wilderness. But Saul, he did not care about the country anymore. He became so consumed with King David, or David, that he took all of his army and he went out and he took them off the border for protection and he went out to find David. And he lost all credibility with the people. Well, one day, David has been running for years and years, and he's in a desolate land where there's no food, there's no water. He's outmanned, he's low on supplies, and he begins to doubt. He begins to become discouraged. Well, somehow word gets back to Jonathan. Jonathan sneaks out immediately from where he's at and what he's doing, and he runs over 30 miles to meet with his friend, and he sees him and he encourages him and he strengthens David. And he tells him, "You will be king and my father will never catch you because you are God's anointed." And one last time, he strengthens his friend. They say their goodbyes, and Jonathan departs. This would be the last time they would ever see each other, because a few years later, Jonathan would be killed in a battle with the Philistines, along with King Saul. And so their friendship began in the strangest of ways. And it ended with the death of a close friend. But as we look at this story, we can see what we need to look for in a friend. And we can see what we need to be like in a friend. So here are 3 attributes that Jonathan showed about being a good friend. The first one is this: he was committed to David. Committed to David. David was so popular, he began to worry about David. David was so popular, Saul began to worry about David. He thought he was a threat to his throne. He thought he was a threat to Jonathan and to the fact that his kingdom would not be able to continue through Jonathan's line. But that's not what Jonathan saw. Jonathan saw the potential in this young man. And in chapter 18, verses 1 through 4, we see Jonathan's reaction. It says their souls were knitted together. He loved him as his own soul. A lot of times when we read this story, we think that this is 2 teenagers or 2 20-something young men who became friends. But in reality, Jonathan was the commanding general of his father's army. And in reality, there was probably somewhere between 25 and 28 years of age difference between the 2. And one thing that's interesting as we look at the phrase that they say when it says that Jonathan loved David and David loved Jonathan, it is the same phrase in Hebrew that was used to describe Jacob's love for his son Benjamin. If you remember back to the story of Joseph, Joseph had a brother named Benjamin, and he and Joseph were the only children from Jacob's love, Rachel. And they were the favorite. And so this love, this friendship that these 2 guys had was that of a father to a son, and they wanted to see the best for each other. And so not only were they friends, but Jonathan saw something else. He saw something else that no one else knew, that no one else saw. Because you see, at the time of their friendship beginning, neither Saul nor Jonathan knew that David had been anointed by Samuel. But Jonathan saw something. And it says this in verse 4. It says, "And Jonathan took off the robe that was on him, and he gave it to David with his armor, even with his sword and his bow and his belt." This is very significant. Oh, he just gave him a bunch of clothes. That's cool. No. This is much more significant. Because you see that robe, that armor, that is the robe and armor of the prince of Israel, of the next king of Israel, of the heir. And so seeing the potential, seeing the promise of this young man, he takes off his robe, he takes off his armor, and he puts it on him. And basically he says, I am no longer the heir to the kingdom, but David will be the heir to Israel. And he removes himself as a potential king. and he passes that torch to David. He committed himself to David, not just because of his love, but because he was committed to God. And that's what we need. We need a friend that's committed to God and who is committed to us and who is willing to do whatever it takes to support us. And likewise, you need to be that type of friend. Don't be selfish. It's not all about you. Show those around you that you love them and you care for them. The second attribute that we'll look at is Jonathan put David before himself. Jonathan put David before himself. They had formed this wonderful relationship, this wonderful friendship, and struck up a covenant. And by human standards, this was the dumbest thing Jonathan could have done. He had everything to lose and nothing to gain. But yet he put it on the line for David. He gave up everything for David because he saw the potential. He saw what God had. And not only did he give up everything, not only did he give up his palace, not only did he give up the possibility of being king, but he also stood in and he protected David. And 3 times he protected him. The first one we've already talked about. We've talked about all 3. But the first one was face to face with Saul. Chapter 19, verses 1 through 7. He's face to face with Saul. He goes up to him and he goes to David and he says, David, my father's going to kill you. But I will go and I will convince him otherwise. I will keep you informed. I will help you out. He doesn't rely on somebody else. He doesn't help David hide. I mean, it would have been easy. He could have helped himself out. He could have been like, hey, David, come here, let me tell you something, and then just killed him. He could have been king and life would have been great. But he didn't do that. He went to his father. He protected David, and he got him invited back to the palace because he cared for his friend. The second was at the Feast of the Moon, where David did not attend the feast. This was in chapter 20, verse 30. He protects David. When Saul asks, where is he? He says, he asked me and I told him he could go. And Saul starts calling him names. You son of a perverse and vile woman, what's wrong with you? If we were to translate that to modern English, I can't say it. I don't want to say it. It's not good. All right? And he calls him names. And then he takes a spear and he hucks it at his own son. First off, Saul's got to get better at throwing spears because he's 0 for 3 right now. But that's beside the point. He dodged a spear that was meant for David to protect his friend, to take care of those that meant something and were closest to him. And then finally, the last time that we're going to talk about tonight, where Jonathan protected David, was in the wilderness. Chapter 23, verse 15 through 18. Jonathan went to his friend to strengthen and to encourage him. That brings us to our third point, and it falls in. Jonathan reminded David of God's promises. And guys, that's what we need. We need a friend who's committed to us. We need to be a friend who's committed to us. We need to find a friend who's willing to do anything to protect us, and we need to protect our friends regardless of what happens. But we also need to remind each other of God's promises and encourage one another of God's hope and promise. David was outmanned. He was living in a desolate place. He was running low on supplies. Jonathan heard about it, and what did he do? He dropped everything and he snuck out of there and he ran to his friend, traveled over 30 miles to encourage his faith, to strengthen his resolve. I mean, let's think about it. King David, the greatest king of all time. A man after God's own heart, needed encouragement, needed to be strengthened. And if he needed to be strengthened, surely each and every one of us need to be strengthened. And that's what Jonathan did. He went and he encouraged his friend. That's what we need in friends. That's who we need to be as friends, is encouragers. Going out and encouraging one another, strengthening each other when your friend is down, when your friend is hurting, when there's pain inside, we need to be there to remind them of who God is. Jonathan didn't present himself as the answer either. I mean, Jonathan could have easily come in and said, hey, all right, enough of this. You've been on the run for years. Let's fix this. I'm going to take my loyal soldiers. You're going to take your loyal soldiers, and we're going to go wipe my father off the face of the map. He could have easily said that. But he didn't present himself as the answer. Just like we shouldn't go, oh, so-and-so is picking on you, so-and-so is making fun of you, well, let me go beat the crap out of them. All right? That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to come along. You're supposed to remind them. And you're supposed to show them the promises of God. And that's exactly what Jonathan did. Jonathan reminded David, you will be king. You are God's anointed, and my father will not capture you because of that. David would be king, but even he needed to be reminded. And I'm sure that a few years later, when David found out that Jonathan had died, that those words of encouragement were brought back up. And he remembered the last time he saw his good friend as he came and he strengthened his will. And he reminded him that God has a plan for him. But the death of Jonathan was not where the story ends. The death of Jonathan reminds us of something. It points to the story of Jesus. Because you see, Jonathan, and all of these attributes we talked about tonight, show us what a friend we have in Jesus. Now, Jonathan will probably be the first to tell you he can't hold the candle to God or to Jesus. But when we look at Jonathan and we look at what he did for David, we can't help but look and see what Jesus does for us. Jesus would fulfill everything that Jonathan hinted at in his life with David. What a friend we have in Jesus. Jonathan served David at great personal cost, right? He was supposed to be king. He was the next in line, but he gave it all up and handed it over to David. Just like Jesus. He's the prince. He's the son of the great God, the almighty king. And he gave it all up to come to earth to serve us. Jonathan gave up his palace. He gave it all up for David. And Jesus gave it all up for us. He left his throne. He came here to purchase our place in the palace. Our place with the king. And just like Jonathan took his robe, took his armor, and he placed it upon David, Jesus takes his righteousness. He imputes it upon us. He gives it to us. He wraps us up in his righteousness so that we can be the sons and daughters of God Almighty. He takes us from being outcasts. He takes us from being abandoned. He takes us from being alone. He becomes a friend to us. And he makes us princes and princesses in the kingdom of God. We are no longer lost sheep but we are sons and daughters of the one Almighty. And Christ made it his mission for us. He took our sins. He looked death in the face and he beat it down so that we could live forever. What a friend we have in Jesus. He gave up his throne to die on a cross so that we could join him as sons and daughters of the great Almighty God and King of the universe. Let's bow our heads and pray. Maybe tonight you don't have very many friends like Jonathan. Maybe you got a lot of friends, but they're not like John. Well, I would encourage you to start seeking those friends. But you should start with the greatest friend of all. You should start with King Jesus. You should make him the Lord of your life. Make him the King of all. Because he has given up so much just for you. And tonight, if you don't know him, if you don't have a friend in Jesus, we're going to give you the opportunity to step out. Leaders are all around the room. You can step out and you can talk to one of them and say, hey, how can I know Jesus is my friend? And they will gladly share with you. Maybe tonight, you just need to come to this altar and you just need to talk to God. Come and pray to him. Come and talk to him. Because he wants a relationship with you. So here in a moment, don't hesitate, but come and meet Jesus. Jesus, thank you for being my friend. Thank you for being my King, my Lord, but thank you for being my friend. Thank you for dying on the cross for me and making me a child of God. Father, I pray if there's anyone here tonight who needs to know you, they will come and ask who you are. That they will step out and you will give them the courage